we are going to talk about tips for ironing fabric for accurate piecing. So ironing is not my favorite thing to do and I don't know about yours, but it's not my favorite thing to do, but it is something that is really important when you want your quilt pieces that for your piecing activity to line up. So I know that when you have low vision or you're blind, that ironing can be kind of scary sometimes because the iron is hot, and if you touch the wrong place, it's no fun. One thing I like to recommend for quilting is a smaller iron, and they have a lot of craft irons out there. This particular one is a cricket iron, and it's really small. It's let's see if I can measure it here. It's about 4 inches by a little over 2 inches, so very small. And that's with the base, so it has a little base that it sits in, which is nice because then it's like a little cradle so that you don't burn anything. You can just set it right in there. And it has a little switch on the front. You just press it and it'll warm up, and when it's ready, it will beep. I actually also have this small little mat that I use. It's called the Omni Grid. So on one side it has a cutting mat, on the other side it has an ironing surface, a pad surface. And it's small, and I like that because I don't want too much bulk around me when I'm working on my projects. And often I'm working with very small pieces. So there are other small irons out there. I'm sure you guys have probably seen them. Here's one. It is a steam fast iron, again, very small. This one does not have a base to it, so you just have to make sure that you're not going to leave it set down on anything for too long. A lot of times quilters, sometimes they'll use steam, but sometimes people steer you away from using steam because it can actually stretch the fabric. So I tend not to use steam for the most part. Now, with the cotton fabric, as I mentioned, with a good quality cotton fabric, it's going to be easier to press crisp seams into your fabric. If you have a thinner fabric, you're going to notice they slide a little bit more, so it makes it a little more difficult to work with. It almost has a sheen on it. And that's usually because they have some sort of sizing on the fabric to make it feel more substantial when you're first handling it, but after it's washed, that kind of wears away. What we're going to do today is show you how to do something with a really small piece of fabric, because oftentimes you will be working with small fabric when you're piecing your blocks together. This is a 2.5 inch square. And what I want to do is to fold this exactly in half on the diagonal. Now, to do this with low vision, especially when you're blind, can be difficult because we want to make sure that all of the points are accurately aligned when we iron it. I have a little trick. And I'm going to show you how to do this with my eyes closed. So I have a straight pin with a ball on the top, and I have my square, and I'm going to hold it so it's like a diamond shape with a tip on top and a tip on the bottom. And I'm going to take the tip from the bottom and match it up to the top. Now I'm assuming that there's no right side or wrong side to this fabric, so I'm just folding it, not having to worry about right side or wrong side. And when I do this, I'm going to feel around that top point. So by folding it up, folding the point on the bottom and bringing it up to match with the point on the top, it now is kind of a half square triangle shape. And I want that apex point on the top where the 2 points are meeting. I'm just using my index finger and thumb to kind of slide it around until I'm feeling with both fingers on both sides of the point to make sure it feels like they're really lined up well. And then I'm going to take my straight pin, and going from the point of the triangle, I'm going to put the tip of my straight pin top down through the point and then bottom up through the center of or further down the triangle, so that I have just a little bite of fabric on my pin. And for those of you who are not familiar with that terminology, a bite of fabric is basically just a small piece of fabric that is woven on to your needle. So you would feel that on top of your pin. Now, because I went top down from the top point, you'll feel the ball of your pin protruding upward from the point, and you want that about an inch or so, maybe depending on how long your pin is, at least an inch, maybe an inch and a half or two away from that point. So now that you've got that lined up, feel with your fingers going from the point where your pin is down the right side until it comes to the lower right folded point. And just make sure that those feel like they're pretty lined up. And then do the same on the other side. What you're trying to accomplish here is to make sure it feels like your triangle is correctly folded. Your two halves are folded into a triangle shape. And so that these edges, at each of these points, there's not going to be, one piece of fabric higher than the other, that they're very even on each side. Once you feel comfortable with that, you're going to put your folded triangle on your ironing mat. Let's see, I want to make sure you can see this. And move this over so I can show you closely. Okay, and I'm going to take my iron, and because I have this pin here on the top, I can just hold on to the pin and the tip of the point of the triangle. And I'm going to take my iron and I'm just going to feel so that I can iron it outward along the bottom. So what I mean by outward is I'm putting the iron a little bit further away from my finger and then going out toward the right. So I'm starting on the left near that point, and I can just hold on to that pin rather than hold on to the fabric, and then just slide that iron to the right. Or you can just kind of, a lot of people say press fabric and not iron, because when you iron, it does tend to stretch the fabric. So you can kind of just put your iron up and down along the edge, that folded edge. So our whole objective here is to make that folded edge into a nice crisp seam, or crisp fold, I should say. Okay, so once I've done that, I can feel it. It feels like it's ironed well. And I'm gonna look for my cradle. There it is. I'm gonna put my iron back in there. That's another reason why I really like this Cricut, is you can find that cradle with your hands very easily. Okay, now let's take a look. So I did that with my eyes closed, and all of the edges of the three points of my triangle are all nicely aligned. So that's just a little trick. I find it's very helpful. Again, the pin in the fabric helps you to give you a little distance from the iron itself. The smaller iron is easy to use and come out with nice even corners on your triangle. So this is our folded half square triangle, and that was my ironing tip for the piecing. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments, and I will try to get back to you on that as soon as possible. Okay, next. So we've talked about the ironing tips. Okay, now we are going to move on to our pattern. So what is a fold and stitch half square triangle, do you ask? And basically, we just went through the fold portion. So we created our half square triangle by folding a 2.5 inch square into a perfect triangle. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take a 2.5 inch square. So the triangle is my darker fabric. You always, typically you'll want to use a darker fabric on top of a lighter fabric to get your designs from your half square triangles. So I'm using a black half square triangle, folded half square triangle, and a white background 2.5 inch square. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up this half square triangle with my square. So again, I'm going to close my eyes, and the nice thing about the folded half square triangle is that it's thick enough so you can really feel it. You can use your sense of touch to line up the two corners on the long side of the half square triangle with the two corners along the diagonal of the square, and then that third corner with the point of the apex of the triangle. So you line those all up. And once it feels all lined up, you'll feel the folded portion of the triangle going along the diagonal of the square. Now, you have a choice here. You can pin this with straight pins, which a lot of people do. I found this tool that I really love, and it's just something that I think has saved me so much time, and it is called the quilt tack. It's a little plastic gun, and it has these little plastic, I call them T-clips. I don't really know what they're called, but that's what they look like to me, some little T-clips. And on the front of it is a very sharp needle, and it has a cover on it so that you don't, when it's not in use, someone doesn't stab themselves with it. You do want to be careful about that sharp needle. So what this does is it provides like a little, almost like a little price tag holder. If you've ever felt and seen on when you go in and you buy a shirt and you see the price tag is attached to the shirt with this little plastic clip, and it kind of feels like it has a T on both ends. Well, that's what basically this is, except the plastic clip is shorter. So I use this to connect things when I'm just temporarily trying to keep them together. And in this case, I want to temporarily clip this half square triangle with these plastic clips to my square. So I'm going to start in the corner. Now, how you use this, you carefully poke the needle through your two layers of fabric, and in this case it's the half square triangle, the folded half square triangle with the square behind it, and I'm going through the point right now. And you put your fingers around, so on either side, I put my middle finger and my index finger on either side of the needle after I've punctured through the fabric. And then you pull on this little handle, and you'll hear it, and it puts that little plastic clip in place just to hold it temporarily. So it's almost like basting. As a matter of fact, a lot of quilters use this to baste their quilts as opposed to using safety pins. Quick and easy way to do it. So I've done that in one corner. Now I'm going to go to the second corner, same thing, carefully with my fingers around on either side of that sharp point, push the fabric down on top of so that it's against the gun, and then pull that trigger, and I've got my second tack. And now I'm going to go to the third side, and same thing. Just remember not to push that needle through with your finger behind it, because that will hurt. And once you get your both fingers around it, pull the trigger. So a nice little tool, again, it's called Quilt, Q-U-I-L. Oh, actually, I guess it's Q-U-I-L, and then capital T-A-K, Quilt Tack. And excellent little tool. When you're done using it, definitely put the cover back on. Okay, so now I have tacked with the quilt tack the half square triangle onto that 2.5 inch square. And my next step is, because that was just, as I said, a temporary thing, I'm just kind of holding it in place instead of straight pins. You could have done the same thing with straight pins. I find that these actually don't get in the way as much. Now you want to make sure, the one thing is it can move around because it's not tight. It's not a tight connection. So again, make sure that your points are aligned, and then we're going to tack the 3 points of the half square triangle to the underlying square, just to make sure they stay in place. So I'm going to start from the back with my needle and thread. It has been, it's knotted. I'm going to pull through, and I'm just going to do a little tack there, 1 stitch in the corner. Oh, if it does, it might catch on one of those things, just move it out of the way. And then I'm going to tie a knot in the back. And by the way, if any of you have not, or are having issues, or have not mastered hand stitching yet, learning to thread your needle by touch, or learning the running stitch or the back stitch, tying off your thread, I have lots of videos on how to do those things by touch, and I will also share those in the notes of this video in case you need them. Okay, so I'm making that little tack there, and a nice little pair of scissors is very handy for this. So I snipped off that thread, and I'm going to snip off that little plastic T-clip at the same time from that corner because I don't need it anymore. Once you clip off the plastic tip of it, the other side falls out easily. Okay, I did several needles here so I wouldn't have to interrupt the process by tying them off. So now I'm going to do the second corner of my triangle, same thing, just one little tack. And you want to get as close to the corner as you can. Again, making sure that it's all lined up. That's my second tack. And I'm going to cut off the thread and pull up that little plastic clip and snip that off. And then the third one. The other nice thing about those little plastic clips is it almost gives you a little tactile reminder of which one still has to be done, because I still have that plastic clip on the third side. Okay, my peel going up from the bottom, one last tack. Again, make sure all of your points are aligned. Now, how this is different for those of you who do quilt, you're saying, why is she doing this? Because typically what you're going to see quilters do is to take a 2.5 inch square and actually cut the 2.5 inch square in half, and then different colors of 2.5 inch squares, and then they would sew the two different colors together to make 2 half square triangles into a square. And that is your typical way of creating a half square triangle. Again, the method that I'm showing you is different, and the reasons for that is, number one, it is much more tactile when you have a folded half square triangle using this method. You can feel the raised portion of this half square triangle very easily when you're feeling the square, and that will become important in subsequent steps when we talk about how to put together various designs using the half square triangle. The other reason is you don't have to worry so much about all the cutting and piecing and making sure that when you're stitching from corner to corner that you didn't, mistakenly not get a perfect point on either end. This makes it so much easier. So if you haven't tried it, give it a try. It's really a cool trick that somebody had taught me. It was online, I believe it was National Quilter Circle that had a video, if I'm not mistaken. So now that we have our half square triangle stitched, tacked to our underlying 2.5 inch square, we are ready to proceed with piecing our square together with other half square triangle squares. Say that quickly. And oh, my iron is going off, which is good. We don't need that for now. And you'll notice that we still have this little opening here that between the half square triangle fold and the underlying square, 2.5 inch square. And what we're going to do after we have pieced together the facing of whatever we're making is we're going to stitch along the diagonal of this half square triangle with a little running stitch. And that will be our quilting guide. So it's not a step we do now because we don't have our layers underneath here to do the quilting, but it provides a nice guide, nice tata guide for you to do your quilt stitching once you've got your pieces all in place. So that is my tip for the folded half square triangles.